Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Propulsion Swimming Podcast. Another week and yet another Aquatics GB team named for the summer. So we've had the Olympic team named, we've had the European team named, now we've had the Paralympic team named, and one of the swimmers who's got a massive chance of winning gold medals at the Paralympics this summer is Stephen Clegg. And I'm very delighted to say that he's joining myself and Dan on this week's episode.
Yeah, he very much is a para-British legend, don't you think, Stephen Clegg?
Yeah, he's getting that way.
I mean, multiple world medalist at swimming out of Scotland up in there in Edinburgh, as well as being a multiple world record holder too, which we'll get into, obviously. I think it's safe to say we're both very excited to have Stephen on the podcast this week to talk all things para, as well as what the build-up will look like as he heads towards Paris Paralympics.
Yeah, now this is an especially interesting podcast for everyone because now what Stephen touches upon is less about like the broader challenges that Paralympic faces and more the benefits that his visual impairment gives to him in the water. And it's really interesting just to hear like how he approaches the technique of swimming, the feel in the water. And it's something that maybe able-bodied swimmers, coaches, parents listening to this podcast can take away and give a go in training to see if it can actually improve how you are feeling in the water. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely helps when he's got Matt in his side, in his corner, coaching him as well, who has the same sort of philosophy as Stephen to really help him progress. I think we just get straight into it because he breaks it down really, really well.
So please welcome onto the podcast this week, British para kind of a legend in the sport right now, Stephen Clegg. So Stephen, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast this week. How are things with you in sunny Scotland? Is it sunny this time of year?
It has been sunny recently, surprisingly. Just a bit overwhelming, but things have been going really good. Thanks for having me along.
No, really, really appreciate it. Obviously, we've got you on because the Paralympic announcement or the squad announcement is right around the corner when we're recording this. So we'd really love to talk through a little bit more of your journey into the sport of swimming and how trials went for you, and then maybe we'll touch a little bit upon Paris as well. So to kick things off, you're an S12 swimmer, which is visual impairment. So could you maybe explain a little bit in terms of what that means you see and how it affects your swimming when it comes to racing and even training?
Yes, it's a question I get asked quite regularly. It's a difficult one to answer, to be honest, just because I don't really have much reference point for what I guess both of you see or everyone else sees. But I guess the easiest way to explain it is I have a loss of central vision, so it's kind of like looking around a golf ball, essentially, a very blurry golf ball. That's not to say my peripheral vision is perfect. It's just my most functional vision that I've got.
Okay. Now, there are 3 different classifications for visual impairment in para swimming. What are the main differences between your S11, S12 and S13 categories?
Purely severity. So S11 is for people with very, very, very low levels of vision that are completely blind. They all have to compete with blacked out goggles regardless of level of vision. S13 is minor visual impairment, I guess, is the easiest way to put it. The range of vision each athlete can have can be different depending on whether it's peripheral or central, and the spectrum of severity is also quite broad within each classification. And then S12 just falls kind of in the middle, really. So
it's really interesting. We actually had a conversation, I think it was during our trials review, that the S11 swimmers, like what they do with the tappers and the full blackout goggles is just incredible. And like almost that we'd love to experience it to have a full understanding of
how difficult it is.
Like, it's not even how difficult, how talented they are in the water.
Yeah, it's a lot of trust you put into especially a tapper. It's not the amount of trust I have because I have an option to use a tapper even as a 12. I think 13s do as well. I'm not too sure on that one, but as a 12 I have an option, but I elect not to just because I'd rather count on myself being able to count strokes and know where I am.
Yes, I think I'd be exactly the same actually. If you're heading into a tumble turn and you're having to feel for a tap on your head, and maybe the tap doesn't hit you in the way that you feel it, I think I would really struggle. Then obviously headbutting the wall, which is then quite dangerous. So I think I'm in the same boat as you there. I'd rely on myself.
Yeah. Martin Walton, who's one of the Sterling coaches, actually had a really cool story. So he came on one of the Paris swimming camps with us to Turkey last summer. And Rob Aubrey, who's our head coach for the Paris side, offered him to try out one of the blacked out goggles. So he did I think he did maybe a couple 100 meters in the pool, but not only that, he then spent the entire day or afternoon with the blacked out goggles on. So he ate his dinner and stuff like that. He said it was it's quite a cool experience for him, he said. So yeah,
humbling.
I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for you to do the same if you ask around.
Absolutely. So am I right in thinking then your like journey into swimming, and you were a bit of a late starter, so you actually got into it at like the age of 18?
Yes. So I swam a little bit when I was younger, like 11 through to 13, and participated in a couple small galas back then, but nothing really too competitive, and couldn't really. When things started to get serious with training, I pulled away from it pretty quickly. Okay. And then after school was quite lost, I guess is probably the easiest way to put it. I didn't really know what it is I wanted to do. I didn't really have much direction. So I got in contact with my brother's coach at the time, who is my now current coach, Matt Trodden, and he got me back into the sport.
That's a hell of a level of coach to jump back into the sport at like 18. So what inspired you to try and aim that high straight away? Was it your brother's success, because he was a bronze medalist at London 2012, wasn't he?
Yeah, so I didn't actually work with Matt out straight out of the gate. Okay. I worked with Bruce Halloran, who was one of the coaches beneath Matt at East Lothian. My brother was really I guess a direction to go towards. Like you said, he won a bronze in London, and I was fortunate enough to watch that race, which was a pretty special day. And it definitely lit a fire to I guess give it a go again. I had no real expectation for it to go anywhere. Definitely not to this high anyway. Because it was more of just a way for me to get a bit of grounding in my life, a bit of structure, and just get a bit of fitness again. I was a bit of a lazy sod, so just needed to get myself going again.
Everyone's journey is different, obviously, but as you look back through your career, do you sort of look back and think, maybe I should have started slightly earlier, or is it actually perfect that you did start at the late age of 18, 19?
Yeah, that's definitely a question I've asked myself a lot over the years.
Really? Okay.
Around could I have been much better than I am? And it's hard to say. Like, I think there are benefits to me starting later. One being I actually enjoy it more now at 28 than I ever have at any other point in my life, and I think that's a very fortunate position to be in. The other is that probably less injuries that could have occurred. Now that I started a bit later, I got to develop properly as a teenager. So yeah, I don't know, it's hard to say. I think there are values and characteristics I wouldn't have had I not stopped, and I guess the reasons why I stopped had come into place.
I presume like you're starting 18, you're fairly like mentally mature as well when it comes to.
People might disagree.
Okay, maybe not. But I think we've spoken to like a good example is Ollie Morgan. So backstroker for the able-bodied side. He really only started taking swimming seriously at the age of 18, like 15, 16. He was still at a really small club, swimming barely any hours. And because he was 18 when he got to that point, there was a level that you understand everything slightly better than when you're a 13-year-old training 20, 30 hours a week. And he's got this appreciation for the sport and everything he's going through, but also like the jumps that he's made so quickly as he's got older as well. Is probably something that you've seen through your career, because you you got to Rio pretty fast out of the gate.
Yeah, definitely. The jumps definitely make the big jumps quickly. Definitely make some of the hard work easier to swallow, for sure. The one thing I will say definitely benefited me was that because it was my choice to come back, I had a lot more appreciation for what I was doing. I wasn't, at no point was I forced to do this. I think a lot of teenagers have parents that are obviously quite pushy and want them to succeed in swimming, which is great to have very supportive parents. And I did or do still, but they also never pushed me too hard to the point where I didn't want to do it, and they were still making me go. So when I came back at 18, it was definitely on my own back, and there was a lot more enjoyment there because I knew it was my decision.
Did your brother have a bit of an impact as well, obviously with the inspiration of winning medals at London, but then did a rivalry sort of start between you as you started to climb through the ranks as well?
Yeah, it definitely was inspiration for sure. I don't think we ever got to the point of a real rivalry. As I started to make my breakthrough into sport, that's when he transitioned out. Obviously, he competed at the trials just there, but he's been out of the water for something like 8 years, so it's not really competitive in the sense that it could have been. But yeah, I think James was always very, very supportive of my journey, and early on he was always one to keep me right when I was, I guess, making some poor choices out of the pool in terms of, I guess, lifestyle and diet, things like that. So because he'd already been through the entire pathway of British swimming already, or Aquatics GB now. Still not got used to that.
We're still not going to get that one right.
We're not alone.
So yeah, he was really good in terms of he was always quite honest with me, and I think that's something I definitely needed if I wanted to actually progress anywhere in the sport.
So we've had both of your coaches, Matt Trodden, on this podcast before, and he's told us some amazing tales of, yes, you have this impairment in the water, but it's also given you like this benefit, and you've almost got like this sixth sense of being able to feel the water a bit differently than some of the other swimmers in the squad. Is that true?
Yeah, I like to think so. I think I have a quite good awareness of my position in the water, at least. I think I spend a lot more time in the water thinking about what my actual body feels like, rather than just going through the motions or just relying on sight. For example, I like my underwater is probably far better than anyone else in our squad. And I think a lot of that is due to I spend a lot of time swimming underwater with my eyes closed and just feeling the pressure on my feet and the amount of propulsion I'm getting with various different kicks, and I've ended up just fine-tuning which one works best for me.
Is there a way you can teach that to other swimmers in your squad in some sort of way?
Yeah, I think just keeping your eyes closed as much as possible, especially for that, it's quite a safe environment to experiment with your eyes closed as long as you've got the room to do it. There's not really much that's going to hurt you if you stop soon enough. So yeah, like Scott Gibson, who is a backstroker, I think you've talked about on your podcast before.
Yeah.
Me and him discuss a lot around backstroke and underwater, because his underwater is probably his weaker element of his race, and but he has a really fantastic stroke. So we usually trade tips on underwater and backstroke technique quite often.
Okay.
You said before, like, when you're racing, you rely on stroke count in terms of getting down the lane and knowing when the wall's coming. Is there a sense of like added control to when you're racing because you're really focusing on, well, one, not losing count, and two, there's this not added danger that you can't see, but you've almost got the responsibility that most swimmers are lucky enough not to have?
Yeah, I think it has its perks and its cons to it. I think one of the cons is generally in my races I tend to slow down going into walls because I'm trying to make sure that I'm focusing on that count as I'm getting close to a wall. So subconsciously I think I'm a little bit paranoid I'm going to hit it too hard or that I might miscount. So there is definitely a downside to it still. Butterfly is probably my most comfortable stroke for counting. We do a lot of in the past we've done a lot of visualization work with sports psych and Matt himself, and I think for me that's something I rely on quite a lot, and I've got to the point now where I can almost get within a couple tenths of my actual splits and times over the course of 100 meters. And that's just a lot of practice, and I guess a lot of consistency in terms of the way I swim.
You just alluded to the butterfly and backstroke. You were very strong at both of them, obviously holding world records in both the 50 and the 100 fly, and then the 50 and 200 backstroke. They're two very different strokes, but you seem to succeed pretty well in both. Do you have a preferred stroke?
Oh, I mean, I've got a mixed relationship with both.
Oh, okay.
How well they're going. I think my true love is probably fly. Okay. Yeah, I just enjoy training it more. I feel more in control with the stroke and stuff as well, so I think that makes a big difference. Backstroke's the one I started out on. That was purely a tactical decision, I suppose. When we came into it, I came in with a lofty statement of saying I wanted to make a Paralympic Games. And when we looked at events, that was probably the one I had the best opportunity to qualify on. I hadn't actually swam much fly up until 2017, 2018 at all. And the reason why I started that was just because backstroke was becoming really tedious. So I decided to take a break from that and fell in love with butterfly. But I had to revisit backstroke last season after a back injury. That just meant I couldn't train as often. So that kind of popped back up on the schedule quite strongly recently. So,
I mean, it's not a bad thing to have them both in your back pocket, because I know most para swimmers, when they head to the Paralympics, have like almost shortened schedules because not every race is available to them on the program. But I think both of those have been to you when you've swum.
Yes, yeah, I'm very fortunate. Fly actually got added into 2021 Paralympic Games. That's the first time it had been back as a S12 event since London in 2012. So it was removed from Rio and got added back in. So it's always living on a little bit of stress, thinking whether or not one of my events is going to get pulled. But I've been fortunate enough to keep all my main ones in so far. So,
is there any specific strokes that are harder because of the visual impairment?
For me, I struggle most technically on freestyle.
Okay.
I just find there's a lot of components to it that I can't quite figure out. Yeah, I'm not really too sure yet. That's a working project for myself and Matt. Yeah, it's definitely a trickier one for me. There's just a lot of, I guess, balance in the stroke that can go off quite easily. That's definitely the one I struggle with the most. Fly for me is probably the easiest because the tempo's less. I know, obviously, because you're doing 2 arm rotations at once. So, for me, that's definitely the easiest for me to get my head around. And backstroke and freestyle seem a bit more complex, but slowly working on all 3 at the same time is
It's a really interesting perspective, though, because like I know, Dan, you teach swimming, like you teach it to juniors, but I highly doubt anyone's ever said like, the balance in freestyle is the reason it's complicated in a way. But you have this innate feel for the water and this impairment, which means that for you, that is a massive deal, and tempo of a stroke is a huge deal.
Yeah, I think the thing we struggle with most, and what's probably frustrating Matt a lot, is that once we change one thing, it has a ripple effect on something else. Because I'm so used to my stroke feeling a certain way that once I change one element of the technique, such as like hand positioning and where I'm trying to catch water, it will put my hips in a different place, or my legs will cross over, start to.
So it must be challenging when you're doing, let's say, a recovery session and training, and then the next day or even the same day you then go into a speed session, because then everything might feel different.
Yeah, definitely. So what we try to do is build up. So we start making changes, obviously a very slow pace, and then over the course of a couple of weeks we won't really train that at too much pace. until we've got the technique changes kind of down and comfortable, and then we start adding in a bit of speed.
It's that appreciation for technique that is lost a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably the reason why me and Matt are really well suited together. That's definitely something he loves more than any other part of swimming, is that sort of the art of swimming and the technique that goes into it.
I know he loves a bit of sculling, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So if we look back then to trials in London, so we spoke to a number of like para swimmers in the lead up to trials, the likes of like Ellie Chalice, and they were really excited by the fact that it was a joint program. So what was it like being able to compete in a competition with like the able-bodied GB stars of this country?
I mean, for me, it was really special just because I got to go to trials with Olympic trials and Paralympic trials with my team. We had a few guys who had a really good opportunity to qualify. Unfortunately, they were just on the wrong side of the selectors, but yeah, it was pretty special for me. Like, I think University of Edinburgh's biggest strength as a team is the bond and the relations we have with each other. It's not just teammates; it's much more than that for us. I think when one of us miss, we all feel the hurt from it. So, yeah, for me that was really special. It's not an experience I've been able to have before. All the trials I've done in the past have been separate. So, yeah, that was pretty special for me, and it was just really cool seeing the world's best at it, at their best as well. So, another opportunity I don't get too often. So, yeah, for me it was pretty surreal trials, and I quite enjoyed.
So normally on a domestic sort of level for yourself, you usually race the able-bodied fields, especially up there in Scotland. So is it kind of weird that you're having to race back in mixed classifications where it's a much more sort of level playing field? Where it isn't as much more level playing field?
Yeah, it was. I don't really think about it too much, if I'm honest. I think the only one real reflection I had from those trials is that was actually the first final I had all season, apart from a couple of short course meets at the start of back in October, November time. But yeah, I think over the years I've always just kind of done a mix of both. It's never been one or the other. So I've got a couple of Para World Series meets coming up, and that's all multi-class anyway. So, and like you say, I've done a few domestic able-bodied meets up here in Scotland. So always through my career, I've always had quite a mixture. I'm not really sure which one I prefer. Probably racing able-bodied, just because the speed matches up better. So I like to race. I like the competitive nature of it, and sometimes you don't always get that at multi-classification meets.
You had what was a pretty fantastic week. So what were your thoughts coming away from London?
Not that it wasn't fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a bit of a blunder on day one with the backstroke. I crashed into the lay line.
To be fair, a lot of people were.
Yeah.
The roof in London doesn't help, does it? So yeah.
Yeah, I think like there's a few elements of it that roof that people don't like, but for me it was just the lighting. Just all the different angles and all the different positions. So I ended up in one different lane at one point, so I had to just scoot back over. But yeah, it was quite frustrating because going into trials, I thought the world record was on. I'd swam at Edinburgh International 3-4 weeks beforehand, just before taper, and I was a 10th outside of that record. So I thought for sure I had it, but wasn't to be. So, but we'll save it for another day.
It's the one missing from the collection right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I want it pretty bad.
Is that the event you're targeting most when it comes to the Paralympics in Paris?
It's hard to say, because I think when I look at my target in Paris, it's to, I guess, be perfect across my range of events. Okay. It's a pretty tough ordeal and a very going to be a big task ahead. But I think it's possible. The freestyle is the one probably that I'm going to really struggle with, but the fly in the back I definitely on for gold there. And so right now it's a balancing act of trying to get them all in a position where I can win. I mean, obviously, every athlete who goes out there is not going there to come second. Everyone wants to win, and everyone's going to say they can win. And I'm no different. But yeah, and there's definitely a few people out there that can stand in the way of that I need to really consider and step up my game for. But yeah, I'd say right now the focus is probably from a technical standpoint on freestyle and backstroke, and then fly is still nursing, I guess, a little bit, just because we don't want to strain anything too much.
Yeah. I think your Paralympic journey so far, almost kind of like looking at it, the trajectory is on the right track to claiming your first para title, because Rio, it was what, 3/4 and a 5th.
Rio, what did I get in Rio? I don't think I only made one final in Rio, I think.
Yeah,
I won 5th place, and then I think I...
Oh, 4th in heats, was it?
Yeah. So I think
Then Tokyo was what, 1 silver, 2 bronzes.
Yes.
And then since then you've had 3 world titles.
Yeah.
So it's on the way. Like, confidence must be building quite nicely.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to keep my feet on the ground.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think going into Tokyo, thinking I'd won before I'd got there was definitely one of my downfalls. Okay. I'd broken the world record at the trials going into Tokyo, and I thought I was a second and a bit clear of the rest of the field. So I thought it was an easy win, and you never can control what other people do at the end of the day. So and I didn't have the race I hoped for. So yeah, I don't want to go in there saying it's going to be easy racing, because it's going to be far from it, especially now after the back of Europeans a few weeks ago is looking very competitive.
Yeah. No, I don't want to jinx anything here, but is there a certain event, or maybe 2 events, that you think you've got a best shot of winning your first Paralympic title?
I mean, I guess I'd like to say the backstroke, seeing as this is up first.
Get out of the way.
Yeah. That's definitely in the best position right now, I'd say, to win.
Now, GB are going to be sending a pretty strong squad to the Paralympics. Like, it's something me and Dan constantly say on this podcast, that the para swimmers in this country are better than the able-bodied guys. Like, head and shoulders, really, when you look at the medal count that you guys come away with. What are the stars from the squad that you're looking forward to racing, other than yourself?
Oh, I think Will Allard is an extraordinary talent. He's a new kid on the block as well, which is really exciting. I think he's going to do pretty special things in the para world, but probably potentially also the able-bodied world as well, which would be very exciting. I don't think it's something we've had in this country before across any sport. So as a para athlete, it's always exciting to see Paralympians make that transition into the world stage on the able-bodied side as well. So it's something that's only happened a handful of times in history. For me, Will Allard got the potential to be around there, So for me, I'm really excited to see him compete. Personal favourite for me is probably Tony Shaw. I've known her since she was probably 13, 14, so I've seen her develop over the years and become a pretty remarkable athlete. And I'm really excited to see what she can do. She's probably one of the toughest swimmers I've ever come across. So I think she's going to do something special as well, hopefully.
Yeah, I think Will Allard he obviously had amazing trials, didn't he? I didn't think anyone would get sort of close, or not for a while anyway, to Rhys Dunn, because he was a sensational swimmer, and now Will Allard is now breaking his record. I think, wow, it's quite special what he's doing.
Don't think Rhys Dunn thought anyone's
no.
But you can't stand still for too long in this sport. There's always new kids coming through.
Yeah.
I mean, I met him for the first time last year. I think last year was probably his breakout year anyway. So and straight away he was a really lovely young man, very very friendly, and that kid just loves swimming. Like he can tell you about anyone's time from any point in British swimming history, which is pretty cool as well. So I know Ben Prowse is a big hero of his.
Oh really?
I think he got the opportunity to meet him in Turkey last year, which is really nice.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Stephen, it's been a lot of fun talking to you on this week's podcast. We do always finish with our guests with some quick-fire questions so our guests can get to know you that little bit better. So we'll rattle through them. What is your favourite event in swimming? I think we've covered this one quite well.
Butterfly.
Yeah. Who is your swimming idol?
Ben Proud.
Oh, nice. What's your proudest moment in swimming so far?
I thought about this recently, actually. I would have to say Rio.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I think the circumstances I guess came through to get there for me were the most challenging, and it was definitely the biggest sense of achievement I had, because I think no one really thought it was going to happen. So
Nice. What's the hardest set you've ever done in training?
Oh, this is actually before Rio. It was 30, 125 split into 2 blocks of 15. So it was, the first 15 was 100 on 115, and then into a max 25 on 45, and then the second block of 15 was a 75 VO2 on a minute into 50 back end on a minute. It was
Funny how you knew that set immediately.
I'm amazed by how far swimmers' knowledge goes back for the hardest set they've ever done.
It locks things in for a while.
Because it's scarred right at the front here in the brain.
That was actually my warm-up for my 200 backstroke world record.
Was it?
Warm-up?
It was 3 weeks before trials in 2016, so I was in hell.
You haven't asked Matt to give it to you again, then?
Oh, I'm never going anywhere near that sort of stuff. I'm very much happy with the sort of training I have now.
Nice. Our final question gets to know you a little bit away from a swimming pool. If you was on a road trip, there's 3 spaces in the car. Friends, family, and celebrities can go with you. Who would you take with you?
Ooh.
And we'll allow the dog that's walking around in the background as well.
She does anything to get on camera. Yeah, definitely dog. Hattie. She's my girl. David Cumberledge, probably. Great swimmer.
Gonna need a big car.
If you can fit in the car.
He recently bought an Audi TT though, so he can squeeze into places. He's a dark horse. He's unbelievably funny. He keeps his incredible sense of humour hidden from a lot of people until he's ready to shine. Third one. Probably Andrew Mullen, para swimmer from Rio and Tokyo. Probably one of the funniest guys I've ever met. Just great guy. Hilarious.
Full of laughs.
Yeah.
If you want to laugh, get him on. He's unbelievable.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on to this week's episode of the Propulsion Swimming Podcast. Best of luck heading forwards for the rest of the year and for Paris, and hopefully that world record gets your name to it as well.
Thank you. Cheers.
Well, that and a Paralympic title as well. I think we'll try and get both of those. That'll be a pretty good meet, I would say. Yeah, best of luck for it.
Dan, I've been fascinated on the journey, the technique of Stephen Clegg since we had his coach Matt Trodden on this podcast, I believe at the start of this year, maybe just before. Hearing a swimmer have a sixth sense for the water, being able to feel the tiniest changes in their stroke, is just something personally I can't comprehend, because I was a bit naive when I swam through the water as a junior. Now everything feels rubbish when I swim. But Stephen is
fitness for you, mate. That's
yeah, it probably is. But Stephen, I have a whole new appreciation for stroke, everything when you speak to him about. It's not challenges, it's benefits to his visual impairment in the water. I don't like to call it challenges because it doesn't sound like it is.
No, challenge is not quite the right word. There are some things that he has to work around. Like, for example, I asked a question like, going fast and then going slow, his body completely changes, as it does with everyone. And so he's got to try and work that out. And obviously Matt, his coach, helps with that. But yeah, the sixth sense, he actually helps other people in his squad with that as well, or tries to anyway. It's fascinating. It really is. But we would never fully understand that. I think most people wouldn't fully understand that because not many people are as good a swimmer as Stephen is, plus with the impairment as well, for the visual impairment. So yes, it's a fascinating thing. And it's difficult. He found it quite difficult to try and explain certain things, like his eyesight right at the very beginning, like how can I best describe this? And it's very difficult for him to do that. And I think it's kind of the same when it comes to the technique side of things as well, because trying to explain how you feel when you swim
when that is
physically.
That's
it's difficult. It's difficult with me trying to think of it now, actually. But yeah.
Now, something that Stephen talked about off air after we finished recording, and something I really want to bring up in this podcast is it's not just the impairment of him swimming, it's learning to swim. So being a visually impaired swimmer, he can't watch someone do this perfect technique and replicate it. There has to be like a way it's described to him, and then he feels it, and then the feedback with Matt, it's that added complication, that added layer, which really means that coach athlete relationship. Even just how you talk to a swimmer and how you verbalize feedback is so important. And it's like it's a new appreciation of everything.
He used the term skill acquisition. So if, let's say, you're born with your sight, but then you lose it later on because you've already learnt, it's almost like a baseline, you've learnt the skills before you had the impairment. That's actually then an advantage compared to someone who's been blind their whole life. It's kind of a shame he brought that up afterwards. Like, we could have included it in the podcast. But
that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Honestly, the whole thing was very interesting.
Absolutely. Now, this summer, we say it on this podcast so many times, the Paralympic squad have an amazing opportunity to better the medal total of the Olympic squad. In fact, I'm pretty sure they will. There's some fantastic names that are part of this team. You think of Will Ellard, Faye Rogers, Tony Shaw, Maisie Summers-Newson. The list is endless, and I really, really wish they were the stars in this sport that they deserve to be, and we will forever keep trying our best to plug the para world. We are not experts in para swimming, but we're skill acquisition. We are acquiring this knowledge from speaking to them more and more. We spoke to Ellie Chalice last year, and just these are supremely talented athletes, and I am humbled every time one comes onto the podcast and we talk to them. And I hope everyone who's listened to this podcast feels the same way, really.
Yeah, it's not just their swimming ability, but it's also their journey of what they've had to go through. Like Tully Kearney, for example, her disability is actually steadily getting worse, and how she has to try and get through that, not just swimming, but her day-to-day life. Some of the stories are incredible. Like Susanna Hex, for example, like a fantastic story. As sad as it is, obviously, with the way it all happens, but she looks at things at such a positive angle. Getting the para guys on is fascinating, and I'd love to see, well, hopefully we're going to get more para swimmers on. That's the aim, and we're going to try our best to learn, because we admittedly aren't experts in the para field, but we'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah, so if any of those, like we very briefly name dropped a few episodes here and there, they're in the archive of the Propulsion Swimming Podcast. Have a search of those swimmers, the likes of Tully Kearney, Susanna Hext, Ellie Chalice. They're brilliant interviews, and I'd highly recommend that you guys go check them all out while you wait for next week's episode to come out, because they're well worth listening to and really understanding their stories ahead of all of those names will be in Paris. Definitely worth learning more about them ahead of this summer's games. But for now, that just about rounds up this week's episode of the Propulsion Swimming Podcast. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course on the Propulsion Swimming Podcast YouTube channel, which is ever growing. We really appreciate that. And, well, I will be back in 7 days' time. Dan, good luck.
Thank you. I will not be here, I'm afraid. But I will not see you in 7 days, but Scott will. So thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one.
You've been listening to the Propulsion Swimming Podcast with Scott and Dan. We want to thank you for joining us and invite you to subscribe to the show, as well as checking out the Propulsion Swimming YouTube channel for weekly tutorials and videos to get your swimming fix. We will be back next week. Until then, we'll catch you on the next one.